If a little girl in the snow handed a cookie to a homeless stranger and called her mommy, would you keep walking? Or would you stay to see what happened next? If this moment grips your heart, consider subscribing so you never miss the rest of this story. The night had folded itself into Seattle like a heavy quilt, stitched with silence and the occasional groan of the wind sweeping off Puget Sound. Snow fell thick, transforming Queen Anne Hill into a white labyrinth of buried sidewalks, muffled cars, and trembling streetlights that looked like dim beacons on the edge of some forgotten frontier. At the corner bus stop, a metal bench half buried in snow shivered against the cold. On it sat a figure, small, ragged, hunched against the storm. Madison Hayes pulled her coat tighter, though the fabric was torn at the seams, the stuffing showing like exposed bone. Her hair clung damp to her forehead. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, and even then it was only half a sandwich pulled from a trash bin behind Pike Place Market. She was 23, but the years of sleeping under bridges, ducking into shelters, and running from memories had carved her face into something older. Her fingers, thin, pale, scarred, cupped around her lips as if to trap the last bit of breath left to her. Each exhale came out white, then vanished into the night. The snowflakes blurred the outlines of passing cars. A few people crossed the street. Their heads bowed, boots crunching in rhythm, unwilling to look at the girl whose presence seemed to stain the whiteness with something the city didn't want to see. Madison lowered her head. Being invisible hurt, but being noticed often hurt worse. And then, like a bell chiming through the frozen dark, a small voice cut the night. "Do you want a cookie?" Madison lifted her eyes. Standing just a few feet away was a child, no more than 4 years old. She wore a purple winter coat with fur at the hood, mittens the size of tiny clouds, and boots patterned with snowflakes. Her cheeks were red from the cold, but her eyes, bright hazel, impossibly alive, glowed like lanterns. She held out a cookie wrapped in a napkin, tilting her head the way only children did, without fear, without calculation. For a second, Madison thought she was hallucinating. Hunger often played tricks on her, but then the girl stepped closer, the crunch of her boots deliberate and real. "Daddy says I shouldn't talk to strangers," the little girl announced cheerfully. "But you look sad. Mommy always said cookies help when you're sad." The word mommy sliced through Madison like a shard of glass. She swallowed hard, her throat too dry to speak. Before she could answer, a man's voice, deep, controlled, edged with alarm, rang out. "Chloe, stay close!" A figure emerged from the falling snow. Daniel Whitmore, 34, architect, widower. His dark wool coat framed a tall, steady presence, his breath puffing out like smoke. His hair, black with streaks of early gray, clung damp at the temples. His eyes, sharp and cautious, scanned the scene the way an engineer scanned blueprints, measuring, weighing risk. He reached Chloe in 3 strides, resting a protective hand on her shoulder. His gaze fixed on Madison, and in that gaze Madison saw what she had grown accustomed to: suspicion, judgment, a swift inventory of failure. "She's cold, Daddy," Chloe insisted, thrusting the cookie closer to Madison. "She needs it more than me." Daniel hesitated. Snow gathered on his coat collar. He wanted to pull his daughter away, but Chloe's little hand remained outstretched, unwavering. Madison's lips trembled. She wanted to say no, to save this child from knowing what hunger looked like up close, but her body betrayed her. Her hand lifted slowly, fingers shaking until they brushed against the napkin. The warmth of that gesture, not the cookie but the offering, hit her harder than the wind ever could. Tears stung her eyes, though she blinked them back. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse, nearly lost in the snow. Chloe grinned. "You're welcome, Mommy." Daniel froze. The word hung in the air, heavier than the snowflakes. He opened his mouth to correct her, to scold, but Chloe had already nestled closer to Madison, as if the stranger was a piece of a puzzle she had been missing. And then, before anyone could speak again, Madison's body swayed, the world tilted, hunger, cold, exhaustion, all crashed down at once. She collapsed onto the snow-covered sidewalk, the cookie slipping from her hand. "Daddy!" Chloe cried, kneeling beside her. Daniel cursed under his breath, instincts firing. He knelt quickly, brushing snow from Madison's face. Her skin was icy, her pulse weak but present. The scars on her wrists caught his eye, faint but unmistakable, silent testimonies of battles she had fought alone. She was young, too young to be this broken. Daniel's mind raced. Logic said to call 911, to let the city deal with her. But Chloe was crying, clutching Madison's limp hand. Something inside him shifted, the same something that had cracked open the day he buried his wife 3 years ago. He gathered Madison into his arms, lifting her as though she weighed no more than the snowflakes clinging to her coat. "Daddy, don't let her die," Chloe whispered. Daniel tightened his hold, his jaw set. "I won't." The walk back up Queen Anne Hill felt endless. Snow stung his face and his breath came hard, but he didn't stop. Chloe hurried beside him, her little boots stumbling but determined. At last, they reached the old brick house that perched like a sentinel above the hill. Its windows glowed faintly, promising warmth. Daniel shouldered the door open, the blast of heat from the furnace wrapping them as he stepped inside. He carried Madison past the foyer, past the framed photographs of another life. His wife's smile frozen in time, Chloe's baby face pressed against her mother's cheek. He laid Madison gently on the couch, brushing damp hair from her forehead. Chloe climbed onto a chair, eyes wide with a mix of awe and fear. "She's our mommy now, right?" Daniel froze, staring at his daughter. He wanted to correct her, to protect her from illusions. But the word mommy cracked something inside him. For the first time in 3 years, his home didn't feel like a mausoleum. It felt fragile, chaotic, unpredictable, but alive. Daniel sat back, rubbing a hand over his face. He knew nothing about this girl, except that she carried scars of a past too heavy for her shoulders. But he also knew Chloe hadn't smiled like this since her mother died. Snow continued to fall outside, blanketing Seattle in silence. Inside the Whitmore house, silence carried a different weight. It was no longer the silence of grief, but the silence before a storm of change. And in that storm, 3 lives had already begun to intertwine. Morning light seeped into the Whitmore house like a hesitant visitor. The storm had softened overnight, leaving Seattle buried beneath a clean white stillness. From the wide windows of Queen Anne Hill, the city looked almost peaceful, as if nothing broken or lonely had ever touched it. Inside, the furnace hummed, carrying heat through every corner of the brick house. The scent of brewed coffee hung in the air, though Daniel hadn't yet touched the mug cooling on the kitchen counter. He stood in the doorway of the living room, his arms crossed, watching the stranger on his couch. Madison Hayes stirred beneath the thick quilt he had thrown over her hours before. Her skin still carried a pallor of exhaustion, but there was color in her cheeks now. Her hair fanned across the pillow like a spill of chestnut, tangled yet strangely delicate. She shifted, letting out a faint sound, halfway between a sigh and a whimper. Daniel's jaw tightened. He had spent the night pacing the hall, listening to the soft rhythm of her breath. Part of him wished she would wake, take the blanket, and leave. The other part, the part he hated to admit existed, had been startled each time her breathing hitched, terrified she might not take the next one. The sound of little feet pattered across the hardwood floor. Chloe, already in her pajamas with pink unicorns, clutching her box of crayons to her chest, appeared in the doorway. "Daddy, is she awake yet?" she whispered loudly, as if whispering itself was a game. Daniel knelt down. She needs rest, honey. She's had a hard night. Chloe nodded solemnly, then tiptoed into the room as though entering a sacred space. She set her crayon box on the rug and pulled out a piece of construction paper. Her small fingers chose bright colors, yellow, blue, red, without hesitation. She began to draw with the urgency of a child who believed pictures could fix everything. By the time Madison blinked awake, Chloe had filled the paper with a crooked house, a sun too large for the sky, and 3 stick figures holding hands. Underneath, in shaky letters, Chloe had written, "My home." Madison blinked hard, confusion warring with disbelief. For a moment she wasn't sure where she was. The warmth, the carpet beneath her, the faint scent of cedar and coffee, it was so far removed from the bitter wind at the bus stop that it felt like a dream. "Good morning," Chloe chirped, thrusting the drawing toward her. "See? That's me, that's Daddy, and that's you." Madison's throat constricted. She reached out, her fingers brushing the waxy paper. The word home blurred before her eyes. Daniel stepped forward quickly. "Chloe." His voice was steady, but his gaze warned of boundaries being crossed. Chloe looked up innocently. "What? She's here? She can be in the picture?" Madison opened her mouth to protest, to say she didn't belong, but the words tangled in her chest. She forced herself upright, the quilt slipping from her shoulders. "You don't have to draw me," she said softly. "I'm not staying." Chloe frowned, her lips pressing into a pout. "But you make Daddy's face funny. Not grumpy funny, soft funny." Daniel exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of his neck. "Chloe, she needs rest, not responsibility." "But she smiled," Chloe insisted. "Mommy used to smile like that." The word hung in the room like a fragile glass ornament, one touch away from shattering. Daniel knelt beside his daughter, his voice gentler. "Sweetheart, she's not Mommy." Chloe tilted her head, unconvinced. She turned back to Madison, who couldn't stop staring at the drawing. "My home." The letters mocked her, sang to her, reached for her in ways she didn't want them to. Daniel cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "You can stay until you're stronger. After that, we'll figure something out." Madison nodded quickly, a reflex to the suspicion etched in his voice. But Chloe's eyes sparkled as if she had heard the opposite. "Yay! You're staying." She scrambled onto the couch beside Madison and leaned against her with the trust only children dared to give. Madison stiffened, unused to closeness that didn't come with danger, then slowly allowed herself to breathe into the warmth of that small shoulder. The day moved cautiously forward. Daniel worked from the dining table, blueprints spread before him, though his eyes drifted too often toward the living room. Madison sat wrapped in the quilt, sipping the tea he had grudgingly brewed. Chloe sprawled on the rug, drawing one picture after another. Houses with too many windows, stick families with hands that stretched across the page. Every so often, Chloe would look up and beam at Madison, as though every line of crayon was proof they belonged to each other. Daniel tried to bury himself in measurements and floor plans, but unease gnawed at him. The house had been silent for years, his work the only heartbeat left. Now the silence was broken by crayons scratching paper, by a girl's laughter, by the stranger who sat too still, her eyes haunted by storms he couldn't see. At lunch, Chloe insisted Madison share her peanut butter sandwich. Madison resisted, but hunger won. She took a cautious bite, chewing slowly as if afraid of stealing from the child. Chloe grinned triumphantly, swinging her legs beneath the chair. "Daddy, see? She eats like us. That means she's family." Daniel almost corrected her again, but the words dried in his mouth. That evening, while Chloe napped, Daniel finally confronted the weight pressing against his ribs. He stepped into the living room where Madison sat, gazing out the window, the blanket around her shoulders. Snowflakes still fell, though more gently now, spiraling like dancers in slow motion. "You should know," Daniel began, his voice even. "This isn't permanent. You'll have a safe place until you can stand on your own again. But Chloe—" He paused, searching for careful words. "She's been through loss I wouldn't wish on anyone. I can't let her get confused." Madison didn't turn. Her breath fogged the glass faintly. "I didn't ask for her to call me that." "I know," Daniel admitted. "But you have to see what it does to her. She's happy. Happier than I've seen her in years. And that—" He exhaled slowly. "That terrifies me." Finally, Madison turned. Her eyes shimmered, not with defiance but with exhaustion. "I terrify you?" Daniel met her gaze. "The way Chloe looks at you does. Because I don't know if you'll stay, and I can't bear to watch her heart break again." Madison's hands tightened on the blanket. She wanted to say she had nothing left to break, that she was already shards scattered across the city's sidewalks. But Chloe's drawings on the coffee table stared back at her. Bright suns, open doors, stick families holding hands. For the first time in years, someone had drawn her into a picture, not erased her from it. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "I don't even know how to be someone worth staying." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, something unspoken flickering behind his eyes. Then he nodded once, sharply, and turned back to his papers. But later that night, when Madison thought he wasn't watching, he saw her carefully fold Chloe's drawing and slide it beneath the quilt like a fragile treasure. And in that small act, Daniel's unease deepened. Because as much as he wanted to deny it, he knew the truth. Chloe wasn't the only one at risk of wanting her to stay. The third night in the Whitmore house carried a weight Daniel couldn't name. Snow still pressed against the windows, but the storm outside had quieted. Inside, however, something else stirred. A tension he felt in his bones, the kind of heaviness architects sometimes described when a structure carried too much weight but refused to collapse. It began with a cough. Daniel had been sketching revisions on a blueprint in his study when he heard it, low, sharp, followed by a silence too long to ignore. He set his pencil down and walked into the hallway. Another cough followed, this one more ragged. He found Madison on the couch, hunched under the quilt, her face pale and damp with sweat. Her lips trembled as she tried to shift upright. "I'm fine," she whispered, but the word broke apart like glass. Daniel knelt beside her, pressing the back of his hand to her forehead. The heat startled him, fierce, unrelenting. "You're burning up." She tried to laugh, but it came out strangled. "Guess my body forgot how to be indoors." "Don't talk." His voice was firm, controlled, the same tone he used when scaffolding threatened to give way. He straightened and called over his shoulder, "Chloe, stay in your room for now." Chloe's voice drifted faintly from upstairs, worried but obedient. Daniel reached for his phone and called Dr. Henry Klein, an old friend and private physician who had once been his wife's colleague at the hospital. Within 20 minutes, the front door opened, letting in a gust of icy air and the man himself, a tall figure with thinning hair carrying a leather bag that had seen too many emergencies. Henry set his bag down, his expression serious. "What have you got for me, Daniel?" "She's running a high fever," Daniel said quickly. "Skin's hot to the touch, weak, dehydrated. She was out in the storm for God knows how long." Henry moved to Madison's side, slipping on gloves with the practiced ease of habit. He placed a thermometer under her tongue, checked her pulse, then examined her with quiet efficiency. Madison drifted in and out of awareness, her breathing shallow, her eyes fluttering like fragile wings. "Temperature's at 102, Henry muttered. "Dehydration obvious. Malnourishment, too. You weren't kidding about exposure." He glanced at Daniel. She needs fluids, rest, and someone watching her around the clock. If this spikes, we'll consider a hospital. But for now, he pulled an IV kit from his bag. Madison stirred weakly. Don't take me to a hospital. Panic edged her voice, enough to jolt Daniel. Henry raised an eyebrow but didn't press. I'll set the IV here. She'll stabilize faster with electrolytes. Daniel, you can monitor her. Call me if she worsens. Daniel nodded, his jaw tight. He hated hospitals himself. They were rooms filled with echoes of his wife's last breath. If Madison feared them too, he wouldn't push her. Not tonight. Henry inserted the line with care. Madison winced but didn't resist. Within minutes, a slow drip of fluid began threading back into her veins, a fragile lifeline. She'll need food once she can keep it down, Henry said, packing his kit. Start light. Broth, tea, simple things. He paused, lowering his voice. She's not just sick, Daniel. She's been worn down for years. Whatever her story is, it's carved into her body. Daniel swallowed hard. I noticed. His eyes flickered to the faint scars on her wrists, half hidden by the quilt. Henry gave his shoulder a squeeze. She needs more than medicine. Don't forget that. When Henry left, the house fell into quiet again, broken only by the soft tick of the IV and the whisper of snow against the windows. Hours slipped by. Daniel sat in the armchair across from the couch, sketchbook forgotten in his lap. Madison drifted in and out of fever dreams, her lips moving, her body restless under the quilt. Sometimes her breath caught, and he leaned forward instinctively, terrified she might stop altogether. At one point her eyes fluttered open, glossy, unfocused, but searching. No one cares, she whispered, her voice raw as smoke. Doesn't matter if I'm alive or not. The words pierced him. Daniel's breath stalled, and for a moment he saw his wife again, those last hours when she had whispered fears he couldn't fix. He had felt powerless then, and the echo of that helplessness returned now. He stood, walked into the kitchen, and scribbled quickly on a notepad. When he came back, Madison had drifted off again, her lashes damp with fever tears. Daniel placed the note beside a steaming mug of ginger tea on the coffee table, angled just enough for her to see when she woke. You're not invisible. It was the only truth he could give her tonight. Near midnight, Madison woke again, her throat parched. Her gaze fell on the note. She blinked, reading and rereading the words as though they might vanish if she looked away. Her hands shook as she reached for it, pressing the paper against her chest. Tears welled, hot and unrelenting, sliding down her fever-flushed cheeks. She tried to cover her face with the quilt, ashamed of the sound that broke from her, a sob so raw it startled her own ears. She had cried before, in alleys and shelters, into pillows that smelled of mildew, but never like this. Never because someone had seen her. Upstairs, Chloe stirred, padding down the stairs despite Daniel's orders. She peeked around the banister, her eyes wide. "Daddy?" she whispered. Daniel rose quickly, lifting her into his arms before she could reach the couch. She's sick, sweetheart. Let her rest. But she's crying. Chloe pressed her face against his chest. Mommy used to cry when no one was looking too. Daniel's throat tightened. He carried Chloe back upstairs, settling her into bed. She's strong. She'll be okay. And tomorrow, you can show her your new drawing. Chloe yawned, clutching his sleeve. Promise? I promise. When she finally slept, Daniel stood in the hallway, staring down at the faint light glowing from the living room. His promise echoed in his ears, heavier than stone. The night stretched long, but by dawn, Madison's fever had broken. Her skin was damp with sweat, Her hair plastered to her forehead, but her breathing had steadied. Daniel watched from the armchair, exhaustion lining his face. He had dozed only in fragments, jerking awake each time she shifted. When Madison finally opened her eyes, the note was still in her hand. She clutched it, as if it were a relic, her voice hoarse. "You wrote this?" Daniel nodded, his gaze steady. "Why?" she asked, fragile, almost childlike. He hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't trap him in promises he wasn't ready to give. Finally, he said simply, "Because it's true." Madison turned her face away, pressing the note against her lips. And for the first time in years, the weight of invisibility lifted, if only a fraction. That evening, Chloe brought her crayons to the couch again. She climbed onto the armrest beside Madison and held up a new picture, 3 figures standing under a giant sun. Above them, in bright letters, she had scrawled, "Not invisible." Madison stared at it, tears filling her eyes again. Chloe giggled. "Daddy says words can be like magic. Did my picture make you smile?" "Yes," Madison whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes, it did." Daniel stood in the doorway, his arms folded, watching both of them. He knew he should feel relief that Madison was recovering, that Chloe was laughing again. But what he felt was something deeper, more dangerous. Because in Chloe's simple words and Madison's fragile tears, the foundations of his carefully guarded life had shifted. And once a foundation cracked, no blueprint could put it back the same way. The snow had begun to melt, leaving Queen Anne Hill slick with slush that reflected the gray Seattle sky like broken glass. Inside the Whitmore house, however, warmth lingered. The fire Daniel had lit in the hearth hissed softly, throwing gentle shadows across the living room where Madison sat, the quilt wrapped around her shoulders like a fragile shield. Her fever had broken the day before. She was still weak, but her hands no longer trembled when she reached for a glass of water, and her eyes, though ringed with shadows, no longer carried the distant glaze of delirium. For Daniel, that should have been enough. He should have felt relief. Instead, unease churned beneath his ribs. It wasn't only her recovery that unsettled him. It was the way Chloe had woven Madison into the rhythm of the house as though she had always belonged. Chloe brought her drawings to Madison first, not him. Chloe wanted Madison to tuck the blanket around her at bedtime, even when Daniel was standing right there. Every laugh, every smile, every bright glance Chloe gave Madison scraped against Daniel's chest like a reminder of something he wasn't ready to face. His daughter was happier with this stranger than she had been with him in months. By mid-afternoon, Daniel closed his laptop, the blueprint lines swimming uselessly before his eyes. From the kitchen came the faint sound of clattering pots. He frowned. Madison had barely stood long enough to take a shower that morning. What was she doing in there? He followed the sound and stopped in the doorway. Madison stood barefoot on the tile floor, her hair damp from washing, wearing a soft sweater Chloe had insisted she borrow. The sleeves hung long, nearly covering her hands. She was leaning over the stove, stirring something in a pot. Steam rose, curling into the air, carrying with it a scent Daniel hadn't smelled in years. It was subtle at first, garlic, onion, something earthy. Then it struck him fully, like a blow to the chest, chicken soup with rosemary, carrots, and a squeeze of lemon. His late wife Isabel's recipe. Daniel's breath caught. He gripped the doorframe without realizing it. Madison looked up, startled by his sudden presence. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean... Chloe said you had some vegetables in the fridge. I thought I could make myself useful." Her voice was tentative, careful. She shifted as if ready to apologize again, but Daniel didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the pot, his jaw tight. "Where did you learn that?" His voice was low, rough. Madison blinked. "It's just soup." "It's not just soup." The words came harsher than he intended. He stepped forward, the scent wrapping around him like smoke. "That's Isabel's recipe." "Exactly." Madison's hands stilled on the wooden spoon. She faltered. "I don't know, Isabel. I just cooked it the way my foster mom used to. Maybe it's a coincidence." Coincidence. The word scraped against Daniel's chest. He turned away, raking a hand through his hair. Coincidence or not, the kitchen suddenly felt crowded with ghosts. Chloe's voice rang out as she bounded into the room, clutching her newest drawing. "Mommy made soup!" she announced proudly, thrusting the paper onto the counter. Daniel froze. Madison flinched. For a heartbeat, silence pressed down heavy and unyielding. "I'm not your mommy, Chloe," Madison said softly, kneeling to meet the child's eyes. "I'm just Madison." Chloe frowned. "But you cook like mommy. You smile like mommy. Daddy looks at you like—" "Chloe." Daniel's voice cracked like a whip. The little girl's words stopped, though her eyes shimmered with confusion. Chloe shrank back, her lip trembling. She turned and ran toward the stairs, her drawing fluttering to the floor behind her. The sound of her small feet pounding upward tore through Daniel's chest. He pressed his palms against the counter, his head bent. Madison's voice came carefully, almost a whisper. "She's just a child." "You think I don't know that?" Daniel snapped, turning on her. His eyes burned, not with anger at her, but at the ache swelling in his chest. "You think I don't see the way she looks at you? You think I don't see how easily she calls you that word? That word she hasn't said in years?" Madison's face crumpled. "I didn't ask for it." "No, but she did. And now what happens when you leave? What happens when she wakes up tomorrow and you're gone?" Madison flinched, clutching the counter for balance. The soup bubbled behind her, filling the room with the scent of memory. Of Isabel laughing in this same kitchen, stirring the same pot, Chloe perched on a stool watching her. Daniel staggered back, his vision blurring with a grief that hadn't softened, hadn't dulled, no matter how many nights he'd buried it under work. He couldn't breathe in that kitchen anymore. Without another word, he turned and strode out, slamming the door behind him. The evening stretched heavy. Daniel sat in his study, the door closed, his blueprints untouched. His hands trembled when he tried to pick up a pencil. He hated himself for the anger that had spilled over, for the way Chloe's face had crumpled, for the way Madison's eyes had widened with hurt. But the truth gnawed at him relentlessly. He was scared, not of Madison, not even of the possibility she might leave. He was scared of needing her. He had built his life around the absence of need. Isabel was gone. No one else could fill that space. To need again was to risk losing again, and he wasn't sure he had the strength to survive that twice. But Chloe had no such armor. She had opened herself to Madison without hesitation, and that terrified Daniel more than anything. In the kitchen, Madison sat alone at the table, the soup cooling in its pot. She stared at the steam curling into the air, at the wooden spoon still resting against the rim. Her hands shook as she remembered Daniel's eyes, how sharp they'd been, how full of pain. She hadn't meant to hurt him. She hadn't meant to stir ghosts with a simple recipe, but everywhere she went, she seemed to leave fractures in her wake. Her eyes fell on Chloe's drawing, abandoned on the floor. She bent to pick it up. 3 figures stood beneath a crooked sun, holding hands. Across the top, in bright pink crayon, Chloe had written, "Family." Madison pressed the paper against her chest, tears welling. She wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe she could be part of something whole. But the scars on her wrists reminded her what she really was, a shadow, a burden, a girl who had learned too many times that homes were temporary. Her whisper broke into the empty kitchen. I can't be her mother. I can't even be mine. Upstairs, Chloe lay curled in bed, clutching her stuffed bunny. The door creaked open and Daniel stepped inside. He sat on the edge of the mattress, brushing hair from her damp cheeks. I scared you earlier, he admitted, his voice low. I'm sorry. Chloe sniffled. I just wanted her to stay. She makes the house warm. Daniel closed his eyes, the ache in his chest expanding. I know, sweetheart. But sometimes people don't stay. Chloe turned, her eyes wide. But what if she wants to? What if we make her want to? Daniel had no answer. He kissed her forehead, tucking the blanket around her. Sleep, Chloe. We'll talk tomorrow. But when he left her room, the doubt followed him like a shadow. Later that night, Daniel returned to the kitchen. The soup sat cold on the stove. Madison was gone from the table, the quilt folded neatly on the back of a chair. He stood there for a long moment, then lifted the lid of the pot. The scent rose again, softer now, but still unmistakable. He ladled a spoonful, tasted it, and for the first time in 3 years, Isabel's laughter seemed to echo through the house, carried on the memory of rosemary and lemon. He set the spoon down, gripping the counter until his knuckles whitened. His fear wasn't that Madison would leave. It was that he was already beginning to need her. The morning after the soup sat cold and untouched, Daniel found himself restless. He had spent most of the night awake, pacing between his study and the window overlooking Queen Anne Hill, unable to shake the sound of Chloe's voice. Mommy, cook. It lingered in his chest like smoke that wouldn't clear. By dawn, the city below was beginning to stir. Plows carved slushy paths down the steep streets, headlights blinking through the mist. Daniel sat at the kitchen counter with his laptop open, the blue glow casting sharp lines across his tired face. He wasn't working. Not really. His blueprints were untouched. His coffee sat cooling beside him. Instead, his fingers hovered over the keyboard, a hesitation that felt like betrayal. Madison Hayes. The name echoed in his head. It would take only seconds to search. He shouldn't. She was a guest, a fragile one at that, recovering under his roof. But doubt gnawed at him, whispering that he was letting a stranger into his daughter's life without knowing who she was. And Chloe, God, Chloe, was already tethered to her with an innocence that scared him. Daniel exhaled sharply and typed the name. The screen flooded with results. At first, there were scattered mentions, a scholarship program, early designs praised in niche blogs, photographs from 5 years ago showing a young woman standing proud beside a mannequin draped in silk and sequins. She was smiling then, radiant with ambition. But below those glowing headlines, darker ones appeared. Promising designer accused of theft at New York Fashion Showcase. Rising star falls. Hayes plagiarizes iconic collection. Industry in shock. From runway to runaway, the collapse of Madison Hayes. Daniel's chest tightened. He clicked one article, his pulse thudding. The story recounted how Madison had presented a bold collection at the prestigious showcase, only to be accused by a rival of stealing designs. The photographs attached showed her leaving the venue in tears, her face pale under the glare of camera flashes. Within weeks, sponsors had pulled out, contracts dissolved, and her reputation shredded across every fashion outlet. There had been no trial, no clear evidence beyond accusations and similarities between her sketches and another designer's, but in the court of public opinion, she had already been convicted. Daniel rubbed his temples, a war inside him. He wanted to dismiss it as slander, but the words screamed off the screen, impossible to ignore. Behind him, a soft voice broke the silence. You looked me up. Daniel turned. Madison stood at the doorway, wearing the borrowed sweater, her hair tied back loosely. She looked fragile but steady, her eyes tired yet sharp enough to know exactly what he had found. "I had to," Daniel admitted. His tone was even, but his shoulders were tense. "You're in my house. Around my daughter." Madison stepped into the room slowly, her arms folded around herself as though bracing for impact. "And now you think you know me." Daniel closed the laptop. "I know what the world says about you." Her laugh was bitter, a sound too sharp for someone so young. "The world loves to watch someone burn. They don't care if the fire was started by lies." "Then tell me," Daniel pressed. "Was it true?" Silence stretched. Madison's throat worked as she swallowed, her gaze fixed on the floor. Finally, she whispered, "No, I didn't steal anything, but it didn't matter. They took everything anyway." Daniel studied her, searching for deception. "Why didn't you fight? Sue? Prove them wrong?" Her eyes lifted then, and he saw the exhaustion behind them, the kind born not of one battle, but of many. When you don't have money or power or anyone who believes you, fighting just makes you bleed slower. The words landed heavy. Daniel thought of courtrooms, of lawyers in polished suits, of the way the wealthy bent truth to their will. He thought of Madison, alone, barely older than a student, swallowed whole by a machine designed to chew people up. But the father in him, the man who had lost once and vowed never to gamble with his daughter's heart again, couldn't let go so easily. "You still should have told me," he said quietly. Her lips curved in a broken smile. "And you would have let me through your door?" Daniel didn't answer. Because they both knew the truth. For a long moment, silence filled the kitchen. The ticking of the clock, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the muffled sound of Chloe humming upstairs. Madison straightened, pulling her arms tighter around herself. "I'll go." Her voice trembled, but there was steel beneath it. "Thank you for the couch, and the soup, and Chloe's smile. But I'm not going to stay where I'm not wanted." She turned, walking toward the stairs. "Madison?" Daniel began, but the words died on his tongue. He wanted to tell her to wait, to explain himself, to admit that part of him did believe her. But fear held him back, the fear of needing her, of letting Chloe need her even more. By the time Chloe came bounding down the stairs with a drawing clutched in her hand, Madison was already by the door, her coat thrown hastily over her shoulders. "Where are you going?" Chloe's voice cracked with panic. "I have to leave, sweetheart," Madison said softly, kneeling to her level. Her eyes brimmed with unshed tears. "This isn't my home." Chloe shook her head violently. "No, no, you are home. You promised to color with me. You promised." Madison cupped her face, her own tears slipping free. "I never promised forever. I wish I could." She kissed Chloe's forehead, then stood, her legs trembling. Chloe clung to her leg, sobbing. "Daddy, don't let her go!" Chloe cried, turning desperate eyes to Daniel. "Please! She's Mommy!" Daniel's heart twisted, every instinct screaming to pull Madison back, to erase the headlines, to choose the fragile joy of his daughter's smile over the cold safety of caution. But he stood frozen, words lodged in his throat. Madison gently pried Chloe's arms away, whispering apologies that cracked like glass. Then she opened the door, the icy air rushing in. Without looking back, she stepped out into the gray slush of Queen Anne Hill. The door closed behind her with a final click. Inside, Chloe collapsed onto the floor, sobbing into her crayon drawing. Daniel stood rooted, torn in half, the sound of his daughter's cries shredding him more than any headline ever could. That night, the house felt emptier than ever. Chloe refused dinner, curling up in her bed with the blanket pulled over her head. Daniel sat in the dark living room, the laptop closed, his reflection faint in the window glass. He thought of Madison's words, "Fighting just makes you bleed slower." He thought of the fire in her eyes when she had denied the accusations. He thought of Chloe's arms clinging desperately to Madison's leg, as if she had finally found something she'd lost years ago. For the first time since Isabel's death, Daniel felt utterly powerless. He had wanted to protect his daughter. Instead, he had broken her heart. And somewhere out in the city, a girl who had already lost everything was walking alone again, her footprints dissolving into the slush. The house had not been that quiet since Isabel died. It was the kind of silence that didn't soothe but pressed down, heavy and merciless, filling every corner of Queen Anne Hill's old brick walls. After Madison left, Chloe had cried herself to sleep in her small bed, clutching a crumpled drawing against her chest. Daniel had tried to comfort her, but his own words had sounded hollow even to him. By midnight, he sat alone in his study, the fire long gone to embers, staring at blueprints that refused to hold his attention. Outside, the storm had calmed, leaving the streets coated in icy sheen. He should have been relieved. One less stranger in his home, one less threat to his daughter's fragile heart. Instead, the emptiness felt unbearable. Daniel rubbed his temples, exhaustion clawing at him. The echo of Chloe's desperate cry, "Daddy, don't let her go," still rang in his ears. He wanted to believe he had done the right thing, that protecting Chloe meant keeping distance from Madison. But deep down, he knew he had let fear dictate every step. Somewhere past 1:00 a.m., a faint sound tugged him from his restless haze. At first he thought it was the creak of the old house settling, but then it came again. A door clicking, the muffled pad of small feet on stairs. Daniel shot up. "Chloe?" No answer. He rushed into the hallway and saw the front door cracked open, a gust of icy air cutting through. Panic bolted through him. He ran outside barefoot, the cold biting like knives. The street stretched out in silver moonlight, slick with ice. His heart stopped when he spotted her, tiny, fragile Chloe, half a block away, trudging through the snow in her pajamas, her boots hastily pulled on but no coat over her unicorn nightgown. "Chloe!" His voice split the night. She turned, startled, but kept moving, tears freezing against her cheeks. "I have to find her, Daddy." "She needs us!" Daniel's chest constricted. He sprinted, the ice burning his feet, until he reached her. But before he could lift her, she stumbled on the slick sidewalk and fell hard, scraping her small hand against the icy concrete. Her cry pierced him to the core. He knelt, scooping her into his arms. Blood welled on her tiny palm, bright against the snow. She sobbed into his chest, shaking. "It hurts, but Madison would fix it. She always knows what to do." Daniel's throat closed. His hands shook as he tried to press his shirt against her wound, but Chloe squirmed. "No, Daddy! She needs Madison's scarf!" And then, out of the shadows, Madison appeared. She stood beneath a street lamp, her coat pulled tight, a small duffel bag at her feet, as if she had been trying to decide which direction to go. Her face was pale, weary, but her eyes widened with alarm at the sight of Chloe bleeding in Daniel's arms. "Chloe!" Madison ran forward, pulling a handkerchief from her pocket, the same faded one she carried always. Without hesitation, she knelt, wrapping it around Chloe's small hand with surprising steadiness. "Shh, sweetheart. It's okay. You're okay." Chloe sniffled, clinging to Madison's neck as if she had found the only anchor in the storm. "I knew you'd come back." Madison pressed her lips to Chloe's hair, her eyes shining with tears she tried to hide. "I never wanted to leave you." Daniel stood frozen, watching. The lamplight bathed them in a glow that felt almost unreal. Madison crouched in the snow, Chloe clutching her tightly, blood seeping faintly through the cloth as Madison held pressure with careful hands. And in that moment, something broke in Daniel. The walls he had built, the armor he had carried since Isabel's death, all cracked under the weight of what he saw. Madison, gentle and steady, binding his daughter's wound with the kind of tenderness no article, no headline, no fear could erase. Words tore from him before he could stop them. "We need you." Madison froze. Slowly she lifted her eyes to him. The shock in her face nearly undid him. "What did you say?" Her voice trembled. Daniel's chest heaved. He stepped closer, the snow crunching beneath his bare feet. "I said, we need you. Not just Chloe. Me. This house. Our lives. We need you, Madison." Her breath hitched, her lips parting as if to argue, but no words came. For the first time, Daniel had stripped away every layer of control, every defense. He wasn't speaking as the architect, the widower, the cautious father. He was speaking as a man who finally admitted the truth. He couldn't do this alone anymore. They carried Chloe back to the house together. Inside, Madison sat Chloe at the kitchen table, carefully cleaning the cut with antiseptic Daniel fetched from the bathroom. Chloe winced but didn't cry, her trust in Madison absolute. When Madison finished bandaging the small hand, Chloe whispered, "Thank you, Mommy," before drifting into exhausted sleep against Madison's shoulder. Daniel wanted to correct her, to remind her of boundaries, but he couldn't. The word didn't sting this time. It soothed. He watched as Madison carried Chloe upstairs, tucking her into bed with a tenderness that was almost sacred. Madison lingered a long moment, brushing hair from Chloe's forehead, before finally turning back to Daniel in the hallway. Her eyes glistened. "I shouldn't be here. I don't want to hurt her more than I already have." Daniel shook his head. "You didn't hurt her. I did. By letting fear speak louder than the truth." Madison's arms tightened around herself. "The truth? That I'm broken? That the world already decided what I am?" "No." Daniel stepped closer, his voice firm, raw. "The truth is Chloe hasn't smiled like this in years. And I haven't breathed like this in years. You matter. To her. To me." Her breath shuddered. For a moment, Daniel thought she might collapse, not from weakness, but from the weight of being seen. "Don't say things you can't mean," she whispered. Daniel's voice softened. "I've never meant anything more." The rest of the night passed in fragile peace. Madison sat in the living room, the quilt around her again, but this time she wasn't alone. Daniel sat across from her, watching the fire crackle back to life. Neither spoke for a long time. Words felt too heavy, too breakable, but silence no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like the first stones laid in a foundation neither of them had planned to build. Daniel glanced at her hands, the same ones that had tied a scarf around his daughter's wound in the snow. He realized then that his fear wasn't of her past. It was of his own future, what it might mean to let her in, what it might cost if he lost her. But as Chloe's soft breathing drifted down from upstairs, Daniel knew the cost of keeping her out was greater still. For the first time since Isabel's death, Daniel prayed. Not for strength, not for escape, but for the courage to believe that broken things could be built again. The morning after Chloe's midnight escape into the snow was deceptively calm. Sunlight poured weakly through the frosted windows of Queen Anne Hill, turning the icicles into shards of amber. The house, however, was not at peace. It carried a silence that pulsed, heavy with everything left unsaid. Daniel woke early, still shaken by the image of Chloe's tiny hand bleeding in the snow, and Madison crouched beneath the street lamp, wrapping it with her handkerchief. That moment, her steady hands, her tear-bright eyes, had undone him. "We need you." He had spoken the words without thinking, but they still echoed through him. He couldn't take them back. He didn't want to. Yet when he walked downstairs, Madison was nowhere in sight. The couch was empty, the quilt folded with meticulous care. Panic flickered in his chest until he saw her in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with a cup of tea, her gaze distant. "Morning," he said carefully. She looked up, startled, as if she hadn't expected him. "Morning." Her eyes were tired but soft. The conversation that had nearly broken him last night hung between them, unspoken yet alive. Chloe's footsteps came pattering down the stairs. Her bandaged hand clutched protectively against her chest. "Mommy, you're still here!" she squealed, running straight to Madison. Daniel winced at the word, but Madison only bent down, hugging the child tightly. "I'm here, sweetheart," she murmured. For Chloe, the day began with joy. For Madison, it began with the weight of a choice she wasn't sure she was strong enough to make. By mid-morning, Daniel had retreated to his study, pretending to work. Madison lingered in the living room, coloring with Chloe. She smiled at the little girls' crooked houses and stick-figure families, but her own heart was restless. Every time she caught sight of the folded quilt or the faint scarlet stain on her handkerchief, she was reminded of how close Chloe had come to harm because of her. She couldn't shake the thought, if I stay, she'll only get hurt again. If I leave, maybe she has a chance. When Chloe napped in the afternoon, Madison slipped quietly into the guest room upstairs. On the small desk by the window sat a stack of stationery Daniel used for notes. She sat, her hands trembling, and pulled a sheet free. The pen hovered above the page for a long time before words finally came. "Chloe, you are the brightest light I have ever seen. You called me Mommy, but I don't deserve that name yet. I need to learn how to believe I'm worth it before I can ever be the mother you dream of. Don't be angry with me. Don't cry too long. I'll carry your smile with me wherever I go. And maybe one day, when I've learned to stand without fear, I'll come back and earn the right to stay." She pressed the pen harder, the ink blotting where her tears fell. "Always remember, you are not invisible. You are loved." Madison. She folded the letter, slid it into an envelope, and wrote Chloe across the front in careful script. For a moment, she held it against her chest, whispering a prayer she didn't know how to finish. Then she placed it on the pillow of the small bed Chloe often used to nap, tucking it beneath the stuffed bunny the girl never slept without. By the time Daniel came downstairs again, Madison's duffel bag was already packed by the door. He stopped in his tracks when he saw it. "You're leaving." Madison straightened, her shoulders stiff. "It's better this way." "Better?" His voice cracked with disbelief. "For who?" "Chloe nearly froze to death last night looking for you." "That's exactly why I can't stay," Madison said, her voice breaking. "She needs stability. She needs safety. I can't give her that." Daniel stepped closer, his eyes fierce. "You gave her more safety last night than I did. You bandaged her hand. You calmed her. She trusts you in ways she doesn't even trust me." Madison shook her head, tears brimming. "That's the problem. She trusts me too much. And I'm not strong enough to deserve it." Daniel stared at her, a storm raging in his chest. He wanted to argue, to beg, to throw the headlines and the doubts into the fire and start over. But when he looked into her eyes, he saw the raw truth. Madison wasn't running from him. She was running from herself. Chloe stirred upstairs, her sleepy voice calling. "Mommy?" The sound sliced through the room. Madison flinched, then grabbed her bag. "Tell her I said goodbye." Daniel's hand shot out, catching her wrist. For a heartbeat, neither moved. His voice lowered, rough. "Don't do this." Her eyes shone. "I have to." She pulled free, tears spilling down her cheeks, and slipped out the door. The hours that followed were unbearable. Chloe woke, bounding down the stairs with messy hair, clutching her bunny. "Where's Madison?" Daniel opened his mouth, but the lie caught in his throat. Chloe's gaze shifted to the empty couch, the folded quilt, the missing duffel bag. Her face crumpled. "She left." "No!" Chloe screamed, her small fists pounding the air. "She promised! She said she'd stay!" Daniel knelt, pulling her into his arms. "She left a letter for you." He led her upstairs to the guest room, lifting the envelope from the bed. Chloe snatched it, ripping it open with desperate hands. Her eyes scanned the words slowly, stumbling through the sentences with a child's halting rhythm. By the time she reached the end, her cheeks were wet. "She said, she loves me," Chloe whispered, clutching the letter to her chest. Daniel's throat tightened. He sat on the edge of the bed, unable to hold back the tears that burned behind his eyes. He had not cried since Isabel's funeral. But now, watching his daughter cradle Madison's letter as if it were a lifeline, the dam broke. His shoulders shook, his face buried in his hands. He cried for Isabel, for Chloe, for Madison, for himself. Chloe crawled into his lap, pressing the letter between them. "Don't cry, Daddy. Madison will come back. She promised." Daniel wrapped his arms around her, the letter crinkling between them. For once, he didn't try to be strong. He let himself weep, because the truth was undeniable. He needed Madison, too. That night, after Chloe finally slept, Daniel sat in the dim light of his study, Madison's letter open on the desk. He traced the ink with his fingertip, reading the words again and again. "You are not invisible. You are loved." He thought of the note he had left by her tea days earlier, those same words he had written for her. Somehow she had carried them into her letter for Chloe, as if the message had bound them all together in ways none of them could escape. Daniel pressed the paper to his chest and whispered into the silence, "Come back, Madison. Please." For the first time since Isabel's death, the tears he shed weren't only for grief. They were for hope, too. 3 weeks passed. Seattle's snow had melted into rain, the kind of relentless drizzle that painted the city in shades of gray. The Whitmore house carried on in its routines, Daniel at his drafting table, Chloe at her crayons. But the silence was different now. It wasn't the silence of grief, nor even the silence of distance. It was the silence of absence, of something missing that both father and daughter felt, but neither could repair. Madison had not returned. Each evening, Daniel found Chloe sitting at the window seat overlooking Queen Anne Hill, her bunny in one arm, Madison's letter in the other. Sometimes she whispered to the paper, as if her voice might reach Madison wherever she was. Sometimes she drew, sketching hearts and hands that always ended up in threes. Daniel tried to fill the gap. He cooked simple dinners, drove Chloe to school, told bedtime stories he had half forgotten. But Chloe's laughter carried an echo now. And every time she said Daddy, Daniel heard the word unsaid at the end, Mommy. Then, one Saturday morning, an envelope arrived in the mail. Heavy cardstock, embossed lettering. Invitation. Children's Charity Fashion Gala, Soho, New York. Daniel frowned. He had no ties to the fashion world. But when he scanned the names of featured designers, one froze his breath. Madison Hayes. His chest tightened. He flipped the card over, scanning the details. It was a fundraiser for children's rehabilitation hospitals, hosted in an art space in Soho. Madison's collection would be showcased as the centerpiece. Daddy? Chloe's voice came small from the stairway. She had seen the card in his hands. Her eyes lit with sudden fire. Is that her? Is Madison there? Daniel hesitated. It looks like she will be. Chloe ran forward, grabbing his sleeve. We have to go, we have to, please, Daddy. Daniel's instinct was to resist. To protect Chloe from disappointment. To protect himself from the risk of seeing Madison again and finding she had already moved beyond them. But Chloe's face, hopeful, trembling, desperate, was too much to bear. By Tuesday, they were on a flight to New York. Soho pulsed with energy that night. The gallery space glowed under chandeliers, its brick walls lined with photographs of children in recovery, their small victories captured in frames. The hum of voices, the clink of glasses, the flash of cameras. It was a world away from Queen Anne Hill's hushed rooms. Daniel adjusted the bow tie he hadn't worn since Isabel's memorial fundraiser years ago. Chloe clutched his hand, her eyes wide with awe. She wore a pale blue dress Daniel had picked with painful care, her bandaged hand nearly healed. The fashion show unfolded in waves of fabric and light. Models walked the runway in pieces that shimmered with quiet poetry. Patterns of interlocking hands, embroidered threads looping one to another, colors that clashed and then blended like broken things mended into beauty. And then Madison appeared. She walked onto the stage not as a model but as the designer. Her dark hair swept back, her posture steady, though her hands trembled faintly at her sides. She wore a simple black dress, no jewelry, nothing to distract from the raw emotion she carried. The room applauded, but Madison's eyes scanned the crowd with an expression almost defensive, as if bracing for judgment. And then she froze. In the third row, Chloe had slipped from Daniel's hand and darted forward, climbing onto the edge of the stage. Her voice rang clear, cutting through the murmur of the audience. Madison! Gasps rippled. Madison's eyes widened, her composure shattering. Chloe held up a crumpled piece of paper, her newest poem scrawled in uneven letters. Her small voice, quivering but brave, recited, Home is not walls, but where Mommy sings. Home is not doors, but the hands that hold me. Home is you. The audience fell silent. Even the cameras stilled. Madison's breath caught audibly through the microphone. Tears pooled in her eyes, glittering under the lights. She dropped to her knees on the stage, reaching for Chloe as if the girl were her lifeline. Daniel rose slowly, his heart pounding. He moved through the stunned crowd until he reached the stage. Their eyes met, his and Madison's, and for the first time since she had left, there was no suspicion, no anger, only a desperate, unspoken plea. Chloe flung her arms around Madison's neck. Madison clutched her tightly, burying her face in the child's hair. Her shoulders shook as she whispered into the microphone, unaware it carried to the whole room. I don't deserve you, but God, I love you. Applause erupted. Not polite applause, but a rising swell, as if the crowd had witnessed something truer than fashion could ever stage. Later, when the show ended and the guests milled about, Daniel found Madison near a quiet corner of the gallery, Chloe still perched against her hip, half asleep from excitement. You came, Madison whispered, her voice raw. Daniel's throat tightened. Chloe wouldn't let me stay away. And He paused, steadying himself. I didn't want to. Her eyes searched his, guarded yet aching. I thought leaving was the only way to protect her. You don't protect a child by disappearing, Daniel said quietly. You protect her by staying, even when it terrifies you. Madison's eyes brimmed. And what about you, Daniel? Can you live with someone who carries shadows like mine? He took a slow breath, glancing at Chloe, then back at her. I live with shadows every day, but when you're near, I see light again. Her lips parted, her defenses wavering. For the first time, she didn't look away. That night, after the gala ended, Madison returned with them to their hotel. Chloe was too exhausted to do more than curl up in bed, still clutching Madison's hand. Daniel sat in the quiet of the suite's living room, watching Madison trace the edge of her daughter's newest drawing pinned to her bag. "It feels like a dream," Madison said softly. "Being seen here, in this city that chewed me up." "It's not a dream," Daniel replied. "It's the beginning of something new. For you, for Chloe, for all of us, if you'll let it be." Madison turned, her face fragile and luminous all at once. "And if I fail again?" Daniel's gaze was steady. "Then we'll fall together. And build again. That's what families do." Her tears fell freely this time, but she didn't hide them. She crossed the room, sat beside him, and for the first time allowed her hand to rest in his. Neither spoke after that. They didn't need to. The threads of something stronger than fear had begun to weave them together, threads of home. The flight back to Seattle was quiet, but it was a new kind of quiet. Not the heavy silence of grief, not the hollow emptiness that had filled the Whitmore house since Madison left, but the fragile hush of something beginning to mend. Chloe slept between them, her small body curled beneath a blanket the airline attendant had provided, her fingers clutching Madison's hand as though letting go might undo everything she had reclaimed. Daniel sat on the other side of his daughter, watching the faint lines of exhaustion on Madison's face as she stared out the window at the clouds. Her shoulders were tense, but her eyes carried a softness he hadn't seen before. Not quite peace, but a cautious leaning toward it. When the plane landed and they returned to Queen Anne Hill, the old brick house seemed to breathe differently. Chloe burst through the door first, running to her crayons with renewed purpose. Madison lingered in the doorway, hesitant, as though unsure if she had the right to step across the threshold. Daniel noticed. He walked back, holding the door open, his voice low. "This is still your place, if you'll have it." She looked at him, startled. Her lips trembled, but she nodded, stepping inside. The following days unfolded with delicate steadiness. Madison didn't claim space, but she didn't vanish either. She helped Chloe with her drawings, read bedtime stories, and folded laundry as though it were second nature. Daniel, meanwhile, found himself less guarded, though his heart beat uncomfortably fast whenever their hands brushed in passing. One evening, after Chloe had fallen asleep with crayons scattered around her pillow, Daniel returned downstairs to find Madison sitting on the couch. She held something in her lap, an old scarf, faded blue, frayed at the edges. Daniel froze. He recognized it instantly. "That's the scarf you used on Chloe's hand," he said quietly, stepping closer. Madison traced the threads with her fingers, her gaze distant. "It was the only thing I had left from before. I kept it through shelters, through nights on park benches. I almost lost it a dozen times, but somehow it stayed." Daniel sat across from her, his chest heavy. "Why that scarf?" Her lips curved into a sad smile. "Because it was the first gift I ever received that wasn't out of pity. Back when I was 16, my foster mom bought it for me at a thrift store. She said, 'Everyone deserves something warm.' I didn't believe her then. But when Chloe held out her hand in the snow, it felt like the only thing I could give that mattered." She looked up, her eyes shimmering. "And now it has her blood on it. A part of her, too." Daniel leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "That scarf kept her safe. You kept her safe. I don't think I've ever thanked you for that." Madison shook her head. "You don't need to." But he did. He needed to say more than thank you. He just wasn't ready yet. The next morning, Daniel made a choice. While Madison helped Chloe with breakfast, he walked into his study and pulled open the drawer of his desk. Inside lay the note he had written during her fever, the one he'd left by the ginger tea. "You're not invisible." He had watched her cling to it, had seen how she folded it into her pocket like a secret lifeline. He hadn't known until then that sometimes the simplest words carried the most weight. Now he picked up the note, the edges worn soft, the ink slightly smudged. He turned it over in his hands, feeling the gravity of what it represented. That evening, when Chloe fell asleep early from an exhausting day at school, Daniel walked into the living room where Madison sat sewing a loose button back onto one of Chloe's dresses. He held out the paper. "Do you remember this?" Madison's breath caught. She set down the needle, her trembling hand taking the note. Her eyes filled instantly. "You don't know what this did for me." "I think I do," Daniel said softly. "Because it did something for me, too. Writing it was the first time in years I felt like my words could matter again." Madison pressed the note to her chest, tears spilling freely. "It kept me from disappearing completely." He reached into his pocket again and pulled out the scarf, neatly folded. He had taken it quietly earlier that day, washed and pressed it until the faded fabric carried a trace of lavender detergent instead of cold and blood. He set it gently beside her. And this kept Chloe safe. It deserves to stay here, not lost in some bag. Madison's hands shook as she picked up the scarf. She looked at the scarf, then the note, then at Daniel. For the first time, she didn't look away. Her voice broke. "Why are you giving these back to me?" "Because they belong to you," Daniel said, "and because they remind me of who you are. Not the girl in the headlines, not the stranger at the bus stop. The woman who saved my daughter. The woman who makes this house feel alive again." The silence that followed was not heavy. It was charged, fragile, alive. Madison clutched the scarf in one hand and the note in the other, her tears shimmering but no longer ashamed. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know how to stay. Every part of me is afraid of failing her, failing you." Daniel's voice was steady, but his eyes were wet. "Then let's be afraid together. But stay." For a long moment, Madison only stared at him, her chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. Then slowly she nodded. And when Chloe wandered sleepily down the stairs, rubbing her eyes, she found Madison still on the couch. She ran forward, climbing into her lap, her tiny voice drowsy but clear. "Please stay, Mommy." Madison's tears fell openly now. She held Chloe close, pressing her face to the child's hair. "I'll stay," she whispered, her voice breaking, but true. "I'll stay." Daniel stood in the doorway, his heart aching with both fear and hope. For the first time in years, he let himself believe the word family might mean more than ghosts. The winter thaw came slowly to Seattle. By early March, the snow that had once blanketed Queen Anne Hill was gone, replaced by the damp smell of earth waking under rain. Crocuses pushed their way through softened soil, fragile yet defiant, and the Whitmore house seemed to echo that same quiet rebirth. For the first time in years, laughter threaded its way through the rooms. Not loud, reckless laughter, but the kind that settled like sunlight in corners long left cold. It began in the kitchen. Madison stood at the counter, hair tied back in a loose bun, chopping vegetables with an ease that startled even herself. Once, she had only cooked out of necessity, scraps in borrowed kitchens, meals consumed with the fear of tomorrow gnawing at her. Now she cooked with Chloe's chatter filling the air, with Daniel's footsteps steadying the rhythm. On the refrigerator door, Chloe had taped her newest masterpiece, 3 stick figures holding hands under a roof, each one smiling. Above them, in large crayon letters, she had scrawled, "Madison's tomorrow." At first, Madison had tried to protest. "It's too much, too soon." But Chloe had insisted. "It's your tomorrow, Mommy. You can't leave it blank." The words had lodged deep inside Madison's chest, both terrifying and healing. One Saturday morning, Daniel led Madison up the narrow staircase to the room Isabel once used as a sewing studio. The door creaked open to reveal sunlight spilling across a bare wooden floor. The room had sat untouched for 3 years, boxes stacked in corners, bolts of fabric yellowed with dust. Madison froze at the threshold. This was hers? Daniel nodded. His voice was quiet, reverent. Isabel's dream was to create a space where she could design freely. After she passed, I couldn't bring myself to open it. Until now. He moved to the center of the room, gesturing around. I want this to be yours, your studio, a place for you to build again. Madison's breath caught. She stepped inside slowly, her fingers grazing the old oak table near the window. Dust clung to her skin, but beneath it she felt the echo of possibility. You don't have to do this, she whispered. Daniel met her gaze, steady. I want to. Isabel would have wanted it too. She believed in second chances. She believed in tomorrow. Tears stung Madison's eyes. She turned away, overwhelmed. The word tomorrow had once been a luxury she didn't dare imagine. Now it stood before her, real and waiting. The days that followed were filled with quiet transformations. Daniel cleared the boxes, painting the walls a soft cream. Madison brought in bolts of fabric, sketch pads, and her old sewing machine salvaged from a thrift shop. Together, they transformed the once-abandoned room into a sanctuary of color and creation. Chloe became its first and most enthusiastic visitor. She perched on the stool by the table, crayons in hand, sketching beside Madison as if her scribbled suns and crooked houses were designs worthy of a runway. Madison never corrected her. Instead, she taped Chloe's drawings to the wall alongside her own sketches, insisting they were part of the collection. One evening, Chloe came running down the stairs, a scrap of cloth clutched in her small hand. Daddy, Mommy's teaching me how to sew, she announced proudly. The word mommy no longer carried hesitation, no longer caused Daniel to flinch. Instead, it softened the edges of his grief. He looked at Madison then, and for the first time, the word felt like an embrace rather than a wound. On the first Sunday of spring, Daniel suggested they cook together. Madison hesitated. Her memories of kitchens were filled with arguments, slammed doors, accusations. But when Chloe clapped her hands and begged for pancakes, she agreed. They gathered in the kitchen, sunlight streaming through the windows. Daniel mixed batter while Chloe cracked eggs with messy determination. Madison stirred blueberries into the bowl, laughing when the juice stained her fingers purple. For a moment she froze, startled by the sound of her own laughter. She hadn't heard it in years, not like this, unforced, full, alive. When the pancakes were ready, Chloe insisted on setting the table herself. She placed 3 plates carefully, then climbed onto her chair and announced, "Family breakfast." They ate together, the simple meal tasting richer than any feast. Chloe smeared syrup on her cheeks, Madison scolded gently while hiding a smile, and Daniel sat watching them both with a heart that no longer felt empty. That evening, Daniel brought Madison to the small garden behind the house. The soil was still damp, but crocuses bloomed in clusters along the fence. He handed her a packet of seeds, lavender, her favorite scent. "I thought we could plant these together," he said. Madison's hands trembled as she tore the packet open. They knelt side by side, pressing seeds into the earth, covering them gently. "You think they'll grow?" she asked softly. "They will," Daniel said. "With care, they always do." Madison looked at him then, realizing he wasn't only speaking of flowers. Weeks later, on a Sunday morning drenched in golden light, Madison set the table with linen she had sewn herself, Chloe skipped in with her bunny, shouting, "Mommy and Daddy, pancakes are ready!" Daniel laughed, lifting Chloe into his arms. Madison stood in the kitchen doorway, a dish towel over her shoulder, her heart swelling at the sight of them. For so long, she had believed she was invisible, disposable, a shadow fading into the city's noise. But here, in this house, with these two souls, she was not invisible. She was necessary. She joined them at the table, Chloe climbing into her lap, Daniel's hand brushing hers under the cloth. As they ate, Chloe pointed proudly to the embroidered words Madison had stitched onto a new set of hand towels hanging by the stove. "Family is not built by blood, but by the hands that hold when you're lost." Daniel read them aloud, his voice rough with emotion. "That's true," he said softly, looking at Madison. Her eyes shone. "It's the only truth I know." Later that day, Madison returned to her studio. She stood before the bulletin board pinned with sketches and swatches, Chloe's crayon drawings mixed among them. At the top, in Chloe's handwriting, still taped where she had put it weeks ago, were the words, "Madison's tomorrow." For the first time, Madison smiled without fear of what came next. Tomorrow wasn't a shadow anymore. It was a door opening, a thread weaving forward, a life she was ready to claim. Daniel appeared in the doorway, Chloe perched on his hip. "What are you working on?" he asked. Madison turned, her heart steady. "Our future." And for once, she believed it. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this heartfelt story. From that snowy night in Seattle to the laughter-filling Daniel, Madison, and Chloe's home, this journey reminds us that family isn't only built by blood, but by love, presence, and the hands that hold us when we are lost. If this story touched your heart, gave you hope, or made you smile, please consider subscribing so we can continue sharing more stories of healing, love, and finding home together. Once again, thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next story.